The fourth week of a series that we've been doing. This series has been Who Are We? Being and Making Disciples. And so, in a lot of ways, this is really just talking about what's our why as a church. Why are we here? And of course, this builds off our mission statement to make disciples of Jesus by restoring people to God and one another in purpose. But specifically, we've talked about, for these last 3 weeks, the actual process of making disciples. And if you remember, we talk about making disciples because this is what's called the Great Commission. It's when Jesus, as he was releasing who he had discipled for 3 years, the apostles, and he is sending them out to continue on with the ministry to start what we call the church. This is the command he gave them, to go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And lo, or behold, we should use the word lo more often in our language, I am with you always to the end of the age. And so he calls them out and sends them out. And like I said, there's not one church on the planet that if you were to say, are you about making disciples? The church would say, no, we don't do that here, right? We know that that's the call. It's the Great Commission. We're all about making disciples. Every church would say, that's what we do. That's the call. That's what we're supposed to do is make disciples. But we often in that fail to ask the question, thanks, buddy, what is a disciple? And so as a church, we're asking that question, and we have come up with a definition of a disciple based on, one of the things that stuck out to me and stuck out to us is when Jesus calls his disciples to go make disciples, they don't go, well, what do you mean by that? There's no follow-up questions because they knew exactly what it meant to be discipled because they had just been discipled, right? They knew exactly what he was calling them to do. And so what we do is we go back and we look at, well, when he invited them into discipleship with him, what was he inviting them into? Did they know? And we look at in Matthew 4:19 is where we get our definition. This is the time when Jesus calls Peter and James and Andrew and John. That was a weird way to say that. Peter and Andrew and James and John, they're fishermen, and he performs this incredible miracle. And they notice this miracle. They realize that Peter, in fact, says, get away from me, for I'm a sinful man. Like the miracle scared them. And Jesus' response to Peter is, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. And from this verse, we get our definition of what a disciple is as a church. If you notice, there's 3 different kind of movements in this verse. There's follow me. Jesus tells them, you follow me, and he makes a promise. I will make you fish for people. And so we break that into 3 different parts. We say a disciple is someone who is following Jesus and being changed by Jesus and on mission with Jesus. And so the first week we looked at what it looks like to, or not the first week, the second week we looked at what it looks like to follow Jesus and the value of actually following Jesus in relationship. And if you go throughout the Gospels, you notice this, it's almost this character of the crowd. How the crowd reacts to Jesus is a really fascinating thing to read about throughout the Scripture. And what we saw was that the crowd is really fickle. And what you notice in the ministry of Jesus, if you watch him, was that Jesus was actually never looking for fans. Even though, by the way, Jesus was crazy popular, just like he is now. If you take a survey, Jesus is going to be incredibly popular. It doesn't matter what your background or religious belief. No one's anti-Jesus. Maybe anti the church or anti-Christianity or not he's the Son of God, but nobody's anti-Jesus. Just like then, Jesus was really popular, but he was never looking for fans. Whenever he had fans, they would typically leave. Sometimes intentionally on Jesus' part, right? The one we joke about is, they're like, man, should we make this guy king? This guy's pretty awesome. And Jesus is like, eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they're like, maybe not. We'll come back. And the crowds leave. This happens over and over again, consistently in Scripture. In fact, by most modern church growth standards, Jesus is really bad at ministry because the groups keep coming and going and coming and going. But what he never does, and in fact, like there's a quote in John where it says the people were all attracting around him, believing in him, but he said he didn't entrust himself to them because he knew what was in the heart of man. The crowd is never Jesus' goal. He invites people to follow him. Jesus was looking for followers, though, because what Jesus is looking for, what he was looking for and what he's still looking for now, is relationship. He's looking for a relationship with you and relationship with me and relationship with them back then. Which is why our definition of a disciple starts with following Jesus. Because that's what Jesus did. Jesus invited them not to just believe in him, but to follow him, to be with him. And then he promised to change them. See, what Jesus' disciples learned and what we learn, what you learn as you walk with Jesus, is that life change happens when you're following Jesus. Life change only happens when you're following Jesus. Time and proximity in relationship with Jesus is where we see change happen over time, which is why you and me were not meant to be a part of the crowd. We were made for relationship with our Creator. And in a lot of ways, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, church and Christianity has been pitched to us, or maybe taught to us, as find a good crowd and sit in it. Right? Like, find some comfortable seats, get in a place that you like to hear the teaching, the kids' ministry is great, the worship is what you grew up with or what you value, and just observe and watch and like it. And Jesus is the total opposite. And the reason Jesus is the total opposite is because you were never made to be a part of the crowd. You're created to be in relationship with your Creator. So he's wanting to invite you into that relationship. So the next thing we looked at last week was, again, a disciple is someone who is following Jesus, but also being changed by Jesus and on mission with Jesus. Theologically, this idea of being changed by Jesus over time is what's known as progressive sanctification. If you remember last week, we looked at justification, sanctification, and glorification as three different types of salvation that exist in the Bible. Justification being a moment when you place your faith in Jesus and you are made right with Him, declared not guilty. Remember, we did our fun little clapping exercise? Right, so I'm justified. And then all throughout life, as I walk with Jesus, He is conforming me into the image of Him. He's conforming me to the image of Jesus, making me more like Him in my attitudes and my behaviors. And then one day, when I cease to breathe and draw breath and my blood stops pumping on this earth, I'm glorified. And I'm in the presence of Jesus forever, never to deal with sin ever again. This is what's called progressive sanctification. We looked at John 15. And we looked at how Jesus said we would glorify His Father. You know, we talked about, we all believe we're here to glorify God, but we never really talk about, well, but how do we glorify God? And in John 15, Jesus says, my Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and prove to be my disciples. And all throughout John 15, He's talking about the way to bear fruit is to remain engaged or abiding in Him. Remain attached to Him the way a vine does the tree. And then fruit will bear, but only when you're attached to the vine. And then we dug a little deeper to see that the idea of bearing fruit, here's what I just said, proving to be His disciples, is remaining with Jesus and loving one another. What we learned, though, and again this points to it, is that sanctification, this idea of growing and becoming more like Jesus, only happens in relationship with Jesus. There is no pathway, biblically, of spiritual growth that exists apart from walking in relationship with Jesus. There's no pathway of knowing more. There's no pathway of worshiping harder. There's no pathway of giving more money. There's no pathway of doing that gets you there. It is being in relationship with Jesus, and then the fruit gets produced from the relationship. And then specifically, we looked at some different ways. Jesus says when He's praying for us and His disciples at the time, but us, in John 17, He says He prays for His Father to sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. We are sanctified as we engage in God's word with the purpose of relationship. We also talked about consistently sanctification happens in relationship with Jesus as we suffer and struggle. In language used by Jesus and by James, the brother of Jesus, in some of his writings, in Peter and in Paul, they all write about the value of suffering and the value of enduring hard things in relationship with Jesus and what that produces in our character. Now, here's the thing about suffering. Suffering will not automatically produce good things for you. I don't know about you. Have you all ever suffered poorly? Yeah, all the time, right? Well, thank you for the testimony. But when we suffer, if we suffer in relationship with Jesus, it can grow our faith. In fact, the writer of Hebrews says that Jesus learned obedience through the things that He suffered. We grow in our obedience by how we handle the hard things of life in relationship with Jesus. And then finally, sanctification happens in relationship with Jesus to prepare us to be used by God. So again, as we talk about this definition of a disciple, someone who is following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and on mission with Jesus, I'm learning more and more. You know, we in the church, we use this terminology a lot of like, discover your purpose. right? Let's find our purpose. I just saw a satirical, like a satire tweet that some church had, sorry, this made me laugh, had just created a Stanley Cup baptismal. It was just this giant baptismal with ladders on each side. It was really funny. Sometimes churches like that are like, just discover your purpose. It's time you got to find out what your purpose is. And I think that's true. I think there are reasons why you're specifically on the planet. You have a specific gift mix, personality, temperament. There are conversations and relationships and things you can do because of how God made you that I can't do. Right? I believe that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, before all that, all of our purpose, every single one of our purposes is to be and make disciples. It's to be a disciple of Jesus who makes disciples of Jesus. That's why you're here. That's why you're here to bear fruit. That's why you're here. And so we looked at Acts 1:8. And in Acts 1:8, which is actually Luke's telling of the exact same thing, the exact same talk that Jesus was giving, the command, the commission of Matthew 28, where we get make disciples. In Acts 1:8, Luke tells some different words that Jesus used, and he says to be a witness. He says, you'll be my witnesses. And we talked about this word witness last week and the word testimony and these words that are very churchy. Right? Can I get a witness? Let me hear your testimony. Right? And we kind of remove those words from like their legal background. The way that the disciples would have heard the word witness is not, they wouldn't have heard that at all. They would have heard like someone in a courtroom giving a witness testimony. And that consistently, again, through Scripture, and you'll actually look at this, you're going to look at this passage in your life groups this week. But what we see in Scripture from Peter and John, they get arrested in Acts chapter 4. And the religious leaders say, hey man, y'all need to shut up talking about Jesus. They threaten them. And they say, listen, whether it's right to listen to you or God, you guys can judge that, whatever you guys think. But we cannot stop talking about what we've seen and heard. We have a testimony to give. We've been a witness to some pretty awesome things, and we're not going to be quiet about it. You see that. You see stories of the woman at the well, right? We looked at this a few weeks ago. She comes to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and she just runs back and tells everybody in the village, come see this man who just said everything I did. Ooh. And everybody in the village is like, that's a lot. She's like, yeah. She just tells her story. Paul, over and over again at the end of the book of Acts, as he's standing in front of Roman and Jewish authorities, just consistently just tells the story. Here's what happened to me. Here's what happened to me. Here's what God's called me to do. Over and over again, we see in Scripture that your story, whatever God has done and is doing in your life, is not just for you. Your story meets other people in their stories. In other words, tying this all together, to be on mission with Jesus is to tell others about how you've been or are being changed by Jesus while you're following Jesus. It all works together. This is why the definition of a disciple that Jesus gave as he invited people into it, it builds on itself. You will not be changed by Jesus unless you're following Jesus. And he changes you so that you can help others see who he is. That's why. There's purpose behind it. So again, this whole series has been about being and making disciples specifically as individuals. So today is Vision Sunday, and the artwork is the same because it's kind of in the same series. But it's hard doing it like a vision. Like our vision's not changing. Who we are is who we are. Like we are called to make disciples, right? I'll put this back up here. I hope y'all all get this memorized and are so annoyed with me saying it all the time. That's my whole goal. Making disciples of Jesus by restoring people to God and to one another and to purpose. This is who we are. This is why we do everything we do. That's not changing. So a Vision Sunday is kind of a weird thing because it's like, are we doing something different now? Like we're not going to make disciples? No. Are we going to not restore people to God? No. Are we not going to restore people to a relationship with one another? No. Are we not going to restore people to purpose? No. We're doing all those things. So we're going to kind of use our definition of a disciple, following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and on mission with Jesus, to talk about what God has for us specifically in 2024. So this is not like a normal Sunday. We're not going to open up a passage and explain what it means. We're going to look through this is something like numbers and goals. Some of y'all are like, numbers, yes. And some of y'all are like, okay, but sorry, it's what we're doing. We're going to be talking about where we've been and where we're going. But I want to say this before, because the temptation in a Vision Sunday can be like very achievement-minded. We're setting goals. We're going to do this. This is Jesus' church. What I mean by that is, man, over the last couple of years, guys, planting a church is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It's not even close. These last couple of years have been awesome and incredibly difficult for me. I have almost quit ministry a dozen times. And some of those were closer than others. The threat got spoken a dozen times. Over the last couple of years, though, the Lord, in His goodness, He met me here, this place last weekend. And he kind of, in a very sweet way, as I'm praying and I'm not suffering well, but talking to God about it, so maybe I'm doing okay. God will meet me in my frustration with how something's going, or things aren't going the way I want them to, or that person left, or this thing didn't go as well as I thought it would, or any of those things. God meets me with a place of, do you know that I want to do all this infinitely more than you do? This is what God tells me. Do you know I want to see disciples made in Walter Hill, Tennessee, way more than you do, buddy? I'm like, yeah. Do you know I want to see people restored to me way more than you do? Like, are you sure? Because I want it real bad. It's like, yeah. Do you know I want to see people restored to a right relationship with one another the way I've called people to live in a relationship in my word? I want that way more than you know? Yeah. Do you know I want people to be released, to be disciple makers, to live on purpose? Yeah, I do. So we're going to do this. This is where we sense God leading. The stuff we're going to talk about today is where we sense God leading. But this is His work. My job, ultimately, our job as leadership, the management team's job, is to be obedient to where God leads us. As of now, this is what we think. This is where we feel like God's leading us. But none of this will happen without His presence and His blessing us. We're simply seeking to be intentional in our leadership, to point us to where we feel God's leading and to step that way. But guys, we're following Jesus. And if you've followed Jesus for any amount of time, you know there are times you're following Jesus when you're like, I hope this is where you're leading me. I'm pretty sure this is where you're leading me, but I'm scared. This was supposed to be easy, right? But there's times that following Jesus is just walking through life, and there's sometimes that God says, get out of the boat, Peter, and get on this water. Peter says, bet. Jesus says, trust. Sorry. There are times in life when following Jesus is a little like into kind of dark and scary places and uncertain, but if Jesus is leading us, we're good. Okay, you ready? So let's talk through, we're gonna go through each part of our definition of a disciple and talk about what we do as a church. We'll celebrate some things and we'll talk about where God's taking us. So, following Jesus. Here's just some ways that we as a church try to help people learn what it looks like to follow Jesus, to enter into a relationship with Him and follow Him. So again, we're saying, how do we help people or point people towards following Jesus? Again, all of these are tough because everything we do is intended for that, right? If we were on a missions project and someone was like, I want to know about following Jesus, we'd be like, no, not today. We're on mission with Jesus today. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we wouldn't do that. So all this is everything, okay? But number one, we create intentional invite environments. And what I mean by that is when we do like fun days as a church, we want to have fun together. That's one of our core values. But I believe the world needs to see Christians having a lot more fun together and like being normal people who enjoy each other. And so the reason we do a fun day at the park, or coming up at the end of May, we have like a Schools Out for the Summer thing we're going to do here where we celebrate teachers and kids. We're just trying to have fun, but we're also creating places where it's super easy to invite people to. When we as life groups just do fun hangout nights, man, it's a great time to invite somebody who's never come to life group before to just come hang out. And that's some of y'all's story. Like, you came to something fun and you kept coming back. We share the gospel. We share the reality of the gospel of God sending his son to die for you and to raise again and to give you new life. We share the gospel on a regular basis. We value and talk about the value of following Jesus in relationship, not just believing in him for salvation, but following him in relationship. We always talk about that. And the last thing is we really prioritize community. We believe to our core that we are not called to follow Jesus on our own. And all of you that are involved in Life Group, you can attest to, and doing this together is how we're supposed to be doing it. It's what we're made to do. So first, I want to celebrate as we talk about this next year. The first thing I want to look at is salvations, baptisms. It's a baptism Sunday. By the way, nobody signed up to be baptized, but we still filled up the baptismal. It's out there and it looks great. And Kaylee made a sticker, and it looks great on the front of the trough. It's a Restoration Church sticker. Good job, Kaylee. Thank you. Found out, Justin told me you made that in the back of your van. So thank you for doing that when you did it. Thank you. But baptisms and salvations, guys, I just want to be honest. This is a tough thing to target, and I hesitate sharing this. But first, I want to celebrate that as a church, man. We've been doing services since Easter. We've had 4 baptisms as a church. Look at this. We got 20 people in the room right now. We've already had 4 baptisms as a church. That's exciting. Last year we did 3 in my neighborhood pool, which is cool. This year we've done 1 in our little baptism on a baptism Sunday. So I want to celebrate that and acknowledge that and be excited about that, and then also talk about kind of where we feel like God's heading with us. I want to say this. This is my kind of promise to you. I will not manipulate or work to get people to be baptized. I won't, okay? We won't. But I'm just saying I talk more than everybody else. So I won't manipulate or work to get people baptized. That is, honestly, I'll be honest, it's a really, really good church growth strategy. Just being frank, and now that I'm in the church plant world, a spoken and appreciated strategy is getting your baptism numbers up. That's great, man. I would love to have a baptism Sunday that we can't do anything else but baptize people. I'd love that. But I'm also not, I have to stand before the Lord and give account one day, right? So I'm not going to manipulate or work to get people baptized, but I really believe this as we're intentional and as the Lord works to draw all men to himself. Here's what we'd love to see. Here's what I'd love to see. We are being intentional about scheduling baptism Sundays because 2024, we want to see at least 1 baptism at every baptism Sunday that we do. So we've got another one 2 weeks after Easter. Then we'll have 1 during the summer. We'll have 1 during the fall and 1 at the end of the year. I think we got 3 or 4 more left for the year. I don't remember. I love it. I get to celebrate. We all get to celebrate God working in the church, but it's his work, all of this. And so I just want to say that if this happens, we'll celebrate like crazy at the end of the year. But I want to say this about, as we go forward on this Vision Sunday, we're going to talk about these next few things, what we're doing to see where we feel like God's leading, what are we doing to follow down that path. And we'll actually talk about this at the end. In one thing that I was taught 10 years ago that saved my ministry life, I mean this, was that in any relationship, there are 3 parts. There's my part, there's your part, and there's God's part. Great news. God does his part 100% perfectly all the time. I can't do his part for him, and I wouldn't want to, right? He cares way more than I do, no matter how much I think I care. Second thing, I can't do your part for you. That's your job. I can't do it. So the best news is I am only accountable for my part, right? And the same is true of you. You're only accountable for your part. You can't do anything. You can't make me do anything. That sounded like a toddler. You can't make me do anything. But it's true. You can't. And I can't make you do anything. I can't make anybody respond. You can't make me respond. But here's what I trust that God's drawing people to him. And I trust that people are going to respond. And it is my job, it's our job as a church, and it's our job as leaders, and it's my job as pastor to do my part. So let me tell you how we're going to do our part to be intentional to see people saved and baptized. We're just going to kind of be faithful to share the gospel, faithful to invite people to follow Jesus, faithful to schedule baptism Sundays, and then also to talk about why baptism. What's the point of baptism? I don't think we've done it. I'll be honest, I haven't done a very good job like teaching on that on a Sunday morning, and we will moving forward. So there's that. Second, life groups. Like right now, we've got 2 everyone life groups. We got a men's group, and then we've had a ladies meeting that just started. Is going to start meeting every month. So this is awesome and exciting for us. Not only that, I want to celebrate and talk about where these groups are now. Number one, the groups are super consistent, which is awesome. Our life groups are really consistent. The people are consistent, and they're really effective. We've got, depending on what numbers we look at, we've got 65 to 70% of our people consistently attend a group. That's really encouraging. You know, like our goal is 100%. My goal is always going to be 100%. That's what we're always going to talk about. But that's a really good starting point. Beyond that, like, I told you guys this last week. Like somebody asked, like, what's going good? And I was like, man, our groups are great. Like the conversations that we have, and like the group I lead, the conversations that I know are happening in the other everybody group and the men's group. I know some of the conversations that happen in the ladies' night. Like, there's just really, really good. Not just like good, we're getting to know each other, but like God's working in these conversations. There is like healing, like people confessing sin, like stuff like that. That like is one of those ideas that you read in the Bible. You're like, that's a cool idea, and it terrifies me. But God intends us to find the relationships where we can do that, because that's where He brings healing and growth. Things like confrontation happening in relationship, but like healthy, guys, there's this thing called healthy confrontation. It happens in real life, and it's happening in these relationships. But not just that stuff, like encouragement and hope and the comfort that comes from seeing I'm not alone in this, somebody else is going through the same thing I am. We're seeing these happen in our groups. I just want to celebrate that, because more than anything else we talk about today, that's at the core of why we're here. We really believe that this is how God works, is in the relationship. That's why we say relationship matters most, because we really believe relationship matters most. So focusing in the next year, here's what we want to see, because we really believe in our life groups. We want to see 4, by the end of 2024, we want to have 4 everyone life groups. We want to double the amount of life groups we have. The men's group consistently keeps meeting, and then the ladies group. We want to see a ladies group that kind of looks like the men's group, meeting a couple of times a month. That's our hope. That's our goal for the next year. So why do we care about growing life groups? And I've already kind of said this. We care because one of our core values is we focus on the next, because that's what Jesus did. Jesus could have easily done a ministry way different than He did, but what He did was invest in the lives of 12 men. And then when He ascended to heaven, He said, now y'all go do the same thing. We are only here because they didn't let it stop with them. We're only here because they multiplied instead of just adding. Right? Adding is, again, it's a really great growth strategy, church growth strategy. It's not a great long-term or biblical focus. We want to be a church built on multiplication, which means we're always focusing on the next, looking for the next leader, the next life group. Our hope, our goal, our long-term goal is to plant churches. Not campuses, but churches. We really believe that's what God's called us to be and do, is to be a little church, to plant other little churches that can reach people in relationship. That's focusing on the next. But the other place is like, you guys know, if you've been to a group, the bigger the group, it's kind of fun when everybody's like, look how many people are here. But then when it's time to talk, we don't really have time for everybody to talk if the group's too big. Really, the most effective groups are somewhere between 6 and 12 people. And once we're running 12 consistently, it's time to multiply. We've got to create more space to add people into so that they can really experience an effective group. So that's the goal. So how are we going to do that? We're going to multiply groups, and I'll tell you more about how we're going to do that later. It's developing leaders and host homes, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Being changed by Jesus, a few things that here's what we focus on as a church to see Jesus change lives. Again, we pursue Jesus together in relationship. We teach Scripture. beyond that, we teach people how to engage in Scripture and how to pray through the purpose of relationship. There's a reading plan back there, basically a Bible reading method back there, and a way to spend time in gratitude with the Lord that both are meant to build relationship with Jesus where life change can happen. But we live out those one another's in community. Things like confessing sin to one another, speaking the truth to one another in love, loving one another, forgiving one another, encouraging one another. All the 59 one another commands of the New Testament, we're seeking to really live those out in community and relationship because we believe that's how change happens. But this next year, we've got a couple of new things we're going to be doing. A couple of new things. These are very Sunday morning centric, but they're meant to build, to kind of provide some tools for people to grow in God's Word and in community. And the first thing is we're going to be doing what really is it's a 101 class. Our first one is going to be this summer. We're about to do this I Believe series, going through some foundations of Christianity. That's really what the 101 class is going to be. So if you're you want to know more about kind of the foundations of our faith, the foundations of Christianity, what do we believe about the Bible, about who God is, about who Jesus is, about what salvation is, about why salvation is necessary, any of those things, that's what this class is going to be. Again, we're going to offer it a couple of times this year, and then I think it's 2 times this year and then 3 times a year moving forward. These are the basics that everything else builds on. And so I really encourage you, even if you're like, no, I know everything. I know how some of y'all are. It still will be a good thing for you to come to. And we'll hear more on that as we get after Easter, because that's the first one will be this summer. And then we also are going to have, besides a 101 class, we're doing what we call a disciple makers class. This is intended for prospective life group leaders. We're going to be looking at what does it mean to be a disciple maker. Beyond what we can just talk about on a Sunday morning, we're going to get a little bit more into the details of how we believe disciples are made in relationship. And then we'll specifically be talking about how we create environments and life groups. Because our groups, if again you know this, are not just conversations. They are intended to be relational environments where intentional leaders can help people take their next step as disciples. That's why we do groups the way we do groups. And so really these disciple maker classes are going to be developing intentional leaders who can create relational environments. So this class is really intended to help us create more intentional leaders, produce more intentional leaders, raise those up. So that we can make disciples in relational environments. Again, this starts right after Easter. You'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. We're really excited about this. Both of these will be on Sunday mornings before service. So that is early, but you guys are grown-ups. You can be there early. I believe in you. Finally, being on mission with Jesus. We do that as a church by developing leaders. That's kind of, as we talk about creating disciple makers, developing leaders, we use that terminology, we interchange that stuff. Again, we'll see that through some of the classes and the trainings we've already mentioned. We've been doing that, but in kind of small relational. We didn't have like a system or a program or whatever you want to call it to do that, so we're prioritizing that this next year. Service projects and other initiatives in our community. We do those already. You'll see this in a minute. We're stepping that up in kind of a big way this year. And then equipping people to reach and minister to our community. One of the job descriptions given to pastors and teachers in the New Testament is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Depending on your background, saints could mean really holy dead people, or it could mean the way the Bible means it, so snarky, the way the Bible means it, which is Christians. You're a saint. If you've placed your faith in Jesus, you're a saint. And so when Paul says the work of me, my job is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, who does the work of ministry? All them. All us. We all do the work of ministry. Do I do it? Yes. Do you do it? Yes. My job is to equip you, to give you the tools to do ministry the way God's called you to do ministry. Again, this is one of the verses we get the idea of there's no sidelines in the kingdom of God. My job's it didn't say equip some of the saints for the work of ministry. What was that? Siri was listening to me too. Yeah, sorry, Siri. We don't have an AI church yet. Yeah. There is a misnomer that my job is to equip some of the saints for the work of ministry, and that's not what it is. It's to equip the saints for the work of ministry. We're all called to do stuff. So as we talk about being on mission with Jesus, one of the ways we do that is to be able to equip people to reach and minister to our community. I can't minister to the people you work with. You can. I can't share the gospel with your family members. You can. I can't disciple your high school best friend, but you can. Maybe. Right? Like that's again, my job is to equip you to be able to do ministry. Okay? So let's talk about what that's going to look like this next year. Leadership development, first of all. We are aiming to take a group of leaders to a conference at one of our supporting churches. We'll talk about who our supporting churches are in a minute. But we've got some supporting churches that, man, they do a great job of reaching their community, making disciples in relationship, multiplying those groups, and ultimately multiplying and reproducing disciples and multiplying and reproducing churches. It's what they do. And it's what I believe God's called us to be in a lot of ways, or doing what a lot of these churches are doing. And sometimes they do conferences, and these conferences it's really conferences they do to equip and train their own people. That we've had a couple of them that would be like, please bring some groups down here. Like, we would love to be able to help you guys do that. So we're going to do that this year. Probably in the fall, probably in August, I think is the next one that I'm aware of. So that's one of the things we're going to do this year. These are always encouraging and impactful, and I want to make sure that we can take a group there this year to help develop us as leaders. The next is missions and service projects. We're looking to expand our community partnerships and projects and missions giving as a church. Our focus is going to be expanding our community partnership. We're going to continue to serve here at Walter Hill. God's opened a door for us to do ministry here. We're going to do that. But we're trying to expand outside of just Walter Hill, of just the school, into the surrounding community, ministries that we're aware of, needs that we're aware of around us. And then we're going to partner with mission organizations. And our goal is to also this year to start supporting another church plant out there that we're aware of. Just because we don't want to wait until one day, because today is one day, right? Why not do it now if we can? In fact, one of the supporting churches, I'll show us in a minute, is a church plant that's less than 10 years old. When they reached out to me, I'm friends with their pastor, and he reached out and was like, we want to support you guys. I was like, really? Like, I thought y'all are receivers right now, not givers. Really challenged, honestly, that challenged me a lot. And I've been praying about it and really feel like this is what's next for us. So now we're going to talk about some finance stuff. Okay. I got to be honest, financial talks at church are incredibly triggering for me. Just being real. I've had this talk with my management team. They've been very sweet and kind and discipled me and ministered to me through it. But these are just hard conversations. I'll just be honest, in my background, I haven't seen this done well in churches, really, having a conversation about finances. But we have to. So I'm going to talk about where we're headed this next year and some things we're doing budgetarily. And if these numbers feel like a lot, just check out. Matt seemed excited. You can talk to Matt afterwards. He'll share his. Aaron said woohoo also. So they can share their excitement with you later, okay? So our total budget for 2024, we're increasing by 21%. Part of that is it's just the reality of we weren't doing weekly services until Easter this last year, right? So part of that's like we're doing more now. Budget goes up when we do more. I want to focus on some specific things, specifically ministry areas that are increasing. Our family ministry, that's kids and youth, we're looking to increase that budget by 40% this year. So I'll show you that there's some areas that are really taking up the majority of this increase, okay? It's not everything's getting a 20% increase. Some things actually went down. Some things are going up. One of those things is family ministry. Life groups. We're trying to increase that budget by 65%. Again, as we do more training and try to get more, develop more leaders, we want to increase that budget. There's a couple other things that go along with that. And then that leadership development goes up 82%. That's really all going to a conference and a couple of other trainings that we've budgeted for this next year that we didn't do this last year, okay? So it's an 82% increase there. You can see, again, a lot of the things that I talked about with what we're emphasizing this year is showing up in the budget. And then here's the big one. It's my favorite. Missions and community service are increasing by 859%. I almost didn't put that number up there because it's a nonsense number. By the way, that's just to keep up with inflation. We need a drum set for that one. Boom. Here's why it's going up that high. I just really felt, and praying about this and running it through with our management team and talking to leaders about it, 10% of our budget's going out the door. So 10% of our budget's going to missions or this other church plant another church plant we're gonna start supporting, whatever that looks like. We haven't landed on that church plant yet. I'm just letting you know. 10% of our budget this year is going towards missions. Again, that's an increase from where it's been. So I just want to point that out. It's going up considerably, okay? And then another thing that we haven't done before is we haven't had any budgeted savings as a church. Good news, last year we ended up with like a $3,000 surplus in the bank, which is awesome. Don't ask what it is right now. We ended the year with $3,000 surplus in the bank. We really want to build up some savings and some margins. So again, we've gone from zero budgeted savings to $8,000 savings in the bank. That's what our goal is by the end of the year. I mean, man, there's some stuff, as a church that the hope is that we won't be in this space forever, right? The hope is that we'll one day have our own space. Well, that is not just going to all of a sudden happen. We got to start building up towards that. We got to start building up towards some of the upgrades that we want to see happen. Stuff in the soundboard area, digital board. I got you, Aaron, Jacob. They're not to the point where they're trying to break the board intentionally yet. It's pretty close, though. Anyway, I just want to, savings is going to be an important part of our budget for this next year. Now, anyone else thinking like that feels like a lot? Like you look around the room like, who's giving all that? who's doing that? Like none of us are going back to mansions, are we? Let me talk a little bit about where our money comes from. We have 4 consistent supporting churches. The Met Church in Houston, Texas, Providence Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, Southeast Christian Church in Parker, Colorado, and Engage Church in Memphis, Tennessee. So let me tell you why they give to us. They give to us because they really believe in what we're doing. They believe in the mission that God's given us. They believe in how we're doing ministry. They are all built, and they're all much, a couple of these are mega churches, so they're much larger churches than us. But they are still built on the foundation of relationship and discipleship making disciples the way Jesus made disciples. So they believe in what we're doing, which is why they're giving to us. And the other reality is they're helping us launch. Their support, we couldn't launch a church without financial support of other churches. The reason you see churches planted, sometimes it'll be another church that sends out 150 people to go plant another church, is because you need that many people. Like you need those many people to support the ministry of a church. We were planting a different way, and so we're really grateful to have their support. And what that looked like this last year, our goal by 2025 is to have a 50-50 support split, meaning that 50% of our support comes from outside churches, 50% of our support comes from among our people. That's kind of our goal we're trying to get to by next year. For 2023, that number was 66% was outside support, 34% was inside support. Okay? Does that make sense? Tracking with me? So we're trying to set that goal to get to 50-50. So what we're doing with our budget this year is we're shifting and trying to get closer to that 50-50. So I'm going to throw some numbers up at you. And don't freak out. They're just numbers, and we'll talk about how these numbers aren't as scary as you think. So our 2024 giving support splits, as we look, we're trying to get to where supporting churches, that's the number that we feel pretty good about coming in from them. That's 54% of our budget. Offerings, individual support, 46%. So not 50-50, but we're getting close. So I want to acknowledge something right now before we move on. And what I want to acknowledge is my own fear. We've lost people when we talk expectations. In fact, if we could write a history of Restoration Church, the unfortunate reality is it would be a lot of everyone's on board until we say, what about you? Will you lead something? Will you do this? I don't know, man. I don't know. We really believe in what you're doing, but I don't want to do it. Like lost families, lost people we care about. I say lost like they're dead. We still love them and we have a relationship with them. But like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard. And I hope you trust me. I hope you trust us. Trust that we're following Jesus. Trusting that the way he calls us to live as Christians and the way he calls us to be as church, how he's called Restoration Church to operate. Also trust that I love you. That, man, we've lost, when we lose people, like it hurts. It's sad. And it's sad because do I feel some rejection there? I'm sure that's part of it, but I really believe in what we're doing. I really believe this is what God's called us to do. And I really believe it's the best for every Christian I've ever known. I really believe that. I think following Jesus and committing to his bride, the church, can bring what families and people are missing out on in their lives. So I just want to acknowledge my fear because I'm going to make a couple of asks of our people. We're going to talk about this today. We'll talk about the next couple of weeks. I'm going to talk about the finances first. I'm going to say this. Giving in the church has shifted dramatically over the last decade. And I don't mean no, you can go find, you want to go Google, just go Google. Change giving in the church. You'll see it's dramatically different. But one of the ways it's changed is, used to be, man, people were in church, and this is not a shot at anybody. People were in church every Sunday. The basket got passed or the plate got passed every Sunday. You dropped in money every Sunday, and that was it. Well, it's just not how the world operates at all anymore, and that's okay. But it makes things difficult. It makes things different as a church. And so here's the deal. In our world specifically of giving, there's two things that I'm asking of our church this year. And the first thing is unity. Again, that number that I talked about sounds huge. In fact, this is the reason I'm about to give y'all some numbers, and the reason I got here is because I first looked at that number in the budget, and I was like, this is so dumb. I cannot share this number with anybody. So first thought I had them dead serious. I was like, I can't do this. And then I did some math, okay? The other day I called it crunching some numbers, and I was like, actually I did, I divided it twice. So it's not really crunching numbers, it's just some math, okay? Again, you look at this number and you're like, man, that is huge. $42,703.60 from our little church. That big number feels overwhelming. But let me say this. Let's say we had 15 giving families. 15 giving families as a church. The average per month for that number is $237.24 per family per month. I saw that number and I went, okay, that's not nearly as scary as, that's how I felt. I'm dead serious. Now this is the average. So some of y'all are looking at this and I get it and you're going, that's a lot. And it may be a stretch. It's very doable for some of us. And for some of us, it's a stretch. And for some of us, this is honestly not generous at all. Just being honest. This is not generous. But I'm not saying this is, I want you to hear me really, really clearly. I'm not saying this is the expectation. I'm saying, man, if we all do our part. If we all do our part, all that stuff we talked about, an almost 900% increase in missions giving is not tough. for us at all. So again, this would be the average per family to see that increase in our budget. Second is, besides unity, I'm asking for consistency. Specifically consistency in our giving. And here's what that means. Please consider automating your giving monthly or bi-monthly online. Consider, it's super easy to do. You can get on the website. I know a lot of y'all already do this. You can get on the website, go to giving. I filmed a little tutorial video and then didn't put it on here because it was just too silly. Because I put the amount as $1 million. Giving every week. That's the platinum membership. You can have all the sweatshirts you want. Life supply of sweatshirts. Yes, you can get as many colors as you want for the platinum. Let me tell you why. I mean this. Like, consider automating your giving online. What automated giving does for us is it really helps with budgeting. It just helps to know what's going to be in there, what's coming in usually for us by the 10th or the 20th or the 30th. Helps us with our budgeting because we've had some months. So like early October through mid-November, those 6 weeks, I'll just be really honest, were incredible. And to the point where it was like, man, this is awesome. Like, we're tracking really well. And so the rest of the last 6 weeks were not so great. Like the opposite. And so I'm saying all that to say, like, if you're able to automate your giving, it just helps. It helps us know. It helps our graphs look more like this and less like this, you know? Second thing that does is it also ensures generosity for you. What I don't want is your giving for you. I don't want your giving, your generosity to be tied to when you remember it. I want generosity to be a lifestyle for you that's happening in the background, whether you're paying attention or not. And so that doesn't mean it's weird, you know. Used to, if you've grown up in church, passing the plates, that would be a time of offering, and we would celebrate it and pray over it as a church. Again, it's just weird. We just don't do that anymore. So it's hard to have that time. So I get how weird that is. I'm just asking you, if we all do our part and we consistently do it, that makes these things possible. It makes growing our ministry, our family ministry and our life groups and our leadership development budgets and our missions and community service and saving some money for what God has for us next. It makes all that possible if we all do our part. It's the only way we're going to see things like salvations and baptisms and life groups and discipleship and equipping and leadership development and community service and missions the way that we really feel like God's calling us to. This is one of those. Here's the other thing I know about when we talk about money. You can hear it in me. Our kind of target core audience as a church, if you were to say, like, who are we trying to reach? It's de-churched people. People that either have been hurt by church or maybe just go like, you know, church is kind of whatever. I haven't really found a church to fit into. I don't really get it. And in a lot of churches, especially if you've been hurt by the church, I guarantee you money was part of that hurt. It almost always is. But money fuels ministry. It always has. You go back to the biblical accounts of like we talked about before in Philippians, where Paul's asked them to give to the church in Jerusalem. Ministry happens financially. And so I'm asking for those two things: unity, let's everybody do our part, and consistency. Please consider automating that. It will just help us moving forward as we continue to grow where God's leading us. Let me say this before we close. Again, good news. God's doing his part. I was sharing with a friend the other day. I've had these conversations with people, and I've probably had these conversations with you. Where we'll be in a conversation about something, church-wise. And what I see when I'm talking to you is the work God has been doing in your life before we ever talked. God's drawing you to him. God is tilling the soil in your heart to prepare you for what he has for you. It is an honor to be a part of your story as a church. I mean that. Like when we're sitting in a group and I hear somebody share something, I'm just like, wow, God, Look at that. Like, you gave all that work, and like then we shared this story in this life group, and you had something for this person in this story because of their story. And I'm just like, it's not like I was laying on the ground like, Lord, what story do you have for us today? Like, it's just the next story. But God's so good. He's doing his part. He is drawing you to him. He is drawing you to be a disciple, to make disciples. I believe that wholeheartedly. He wants this way more than we do. As we continue to grow and expand and we reach more families and people, I believe he wants to make disciples in Walter Hill way more than we do. I believe he wants to restore people to him way more than we do. I believe he wants to restore people to right relationship way more than we do. I believe he wants to restore people to purpose way more than we do. And the good news is God's going to do his part absolutely perfectly. But maybe even better news than that is that he really wants to use you to do this too. That he wants to use me to do this. And I'm telling you guys know this, you've experienced this. What an honor. What like a privilege that God would allow us to be a part of what he's doing. Christian Miller is on our management team. He's the executive pastor at the Met in Houston. And we were on a talk, I don't think we were talking about finances. And he was like, man, I really hope everybody at Restoration knows that they'll never get a bigger return on investment in their time and money than you do at a church plant. And like, knowing that you're not just a small piece of the pie, like we're all we got. Right? Stuff happens here. It happens because we do it, and God's allowing us to do it. And what a privilege and an awesome part. So in each of your seats when you got here, Aaron, you can go ahead and come up and start to prepare to close. Aaron's going to close with a song. In each of your seats, there's a pen and a little card. It just says My Part 2024. I'm asking you all, it's not a requirement. Okay, this isn't school. I'm going to ask you all to look at this and strongly consider what your next part is. Like, what's your next step? What's God calling you to do? As a part of Restoration Church in 2024. And I'm going to do something, and again, this is going to take some courage on your part, but I talked about money in front of people today, so we all do hard things. Write this down as Aaron's closing. Sing if you want to. Don't sing if you don't feel like you want to. You just need to sit with the Lord and what he's calling you to. I'm going to put this basket up here. Before you leave, during the song, after the song, drop your card in here. I want to be able to celebrate what we're committing to as a church, what our part looks like and what God's calling us to do. Okay? So when Aaron's done, I'll come up and I will close in prayer.